Go. Hey everyone! Welcome to. Christa was just quickly eating a banana, so that's why we're late. Welcome to the XX Factor, episode 6, maybe? I can't remember. I might even have the wrong one in the title. I've called it 6. Well, it might be episode 6. I'll change it afterwards if it's the wrong one. Please let us know if you can hear us in the chat. So this is the show where we talk about the gender critical movement, which is like mainly the UK's anti-trans rights movement, and we discuss the conspiracy theories like within the ideology that is gender critical. And it's definitely worth watching previous episodes because it's pretty crazy already. But yeah, anyway, so my name is Katy Montgomerie. I'm a trans woman and I'm a dickhead who argues on the internet, and that is why I'm qualified for this show. And this is...
my name is Christa Peterson. I'm a cis woman and a philosopher and a thorough and academic screenshotter. I saw someone on transphobe Twitter that was like, Christa, like the serial harasser Christa has admitted to being an aggressive screenshotter.
Aggressive screenshotter.
Thorough and academic screenshotter.
Like aggressively screenshots, like go every single time. Yeah, so this week has been we've got some updates from previous episodes, which is exciting, and we're going to be discussing the so there's lots of different motivations in the mind of gender critical people as to why trans people exist and why trans rights exist. And today, so we've already discussed the fear of women's rights and the fear of gay people's rights, and various other things driving it, like the fear of being replaced. And today we're going to discuss, is it sex? Are all trans people perverts? Is that what everyone's rightly scared of? And the answer is no. So that's the end of the episode. But yeah, do you have any things you'd like to mention before we get on to...
Yeah, so the update. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about this one person, Jennifer Billick, who is a influential writer, researcher, theorist in the gender critical movement, who kind of documented is really extreme. She like has long had these very wacky theories about this being a global transhuman conspiracy that's going to like end the world as we know it.
Yeah, what's her little saying? Trans people aren't they're not.
Transgender is the ad campaign for transhumanism.
Okay, yeah. So we're just the stepping stone on the way towards the future of destroying the human race.
Yes. And then we showed that she had many of the people that she has focused on for a long time have been Jewish. And then we showed that she had gotten into some explicit anti-Semitism, repeatedly sharing this video called Transhuman Judaism from Keith Woods, who is a uncontroversial anti-Semite, just explicit. And we also showed that she had gotten into like some more violent rhetoric. And she's a person who has been followed and shared platforms with a bunch of mainstream gender critical people. And last Sunday, after our last show, I noticed that LGBT Alliance Canada had actually shared not just like other organizations, her non-explicit anti-Semitism post, but had shared this post where she is sharing Keith Wood's video and talking about the Jewish aspect of this transgender / transhumanist agenda. So this is a big deal, right? So this is like the, of the mainstream stuff, the one that I've seen kind of like follow her all the way from the kind of covert anti-Semitism where it's not explicitly naming that these people are all Jewish, to actually specifically talking about the Jewishness in this agenda. So I started tweeting at them and they apologized.
Well, let's get that one up, shall we? Is that this one? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so they said this Facebook post by Jennifer Billick is terrible.
The one they shared, the one they read before sharing.
They say, not sure how it got shared on our Facebook feed, but it's been removed and we unreservedly apologize for sharing it. Billick's investigation of gender theory's wealthy backers initially interested many feminists, but she's lost the plot. And then if you go to the next one, I think there's a little more.
To be honest, that's a fairly good response. That's much better than I was expecting from them.
Yeah, so I'm like, and then they said, we're happy to count Jewish people among our members, leaders, and even our founders, and we have no patience for this kind of anti-Semitism and conspiracy theorizing. We'll look into tightening up who can post stuff on our Facebook pages. So I think on the side of like accountability for sharing explicit anti-Semitism, this is low, right? They're like, look into it. They're not sure how it happened, and they're not gonna report back and say. I'm happy about the kind of.
They've called it out. I almost never see gender critical people calling each other out like this. I mean, so far none of this is like the first group or person of note to even express anything, and usually they just quietly unfollow or just say this is bad and then that's it. But these, they've explicitly said this is anti-Semitism in their review, and they're saying they're not going to deal with her anymore and stuff. So I just don't. I'd be surprised if many other people do this, I almost think they might get in trouble with some other gender critical people for doing this.
Yeah, the part where they not only respond to the very explicit anti-Semitism, but say that in general the conspiracy theorizing has gone off the rails stuff. I'm not sure if it's temporally true, but I think if any gender critical people who want to take this anti-Semitism seriously need to respond and address the covert stuff too, right? The whole theory is when she's talking about all these Jewish people, like she has been for a long time, and not just letting the mask drop. Letting the mask drop is bad. Promoting.
I hope they haven't just what the reason why they were interested in the first place is because it made trans people look bad. Obviously, they not because it's true or good research or anything like that. It was just because, here's someone making a load of claims which make trans people look bad. Therefore, it's good for me, and everyone's excited by it, so I'm just going to share it. But then when you say, "Gosh, you realize this is really bad," for the anti-Semite reasons, then they might just get rid of that bit, but then keep the idea that trans people are some globalist movement funded by billionaires, but just kind of the last step, the mask off step. They just kind of put the mask back on. So I guess that's the concern here, is that they'll just be able to, carry on talking about the same ideas and the same people without actually doing anything about it, which is probably what they're going to do, to be honest. So.
Yeah. So then LGBT Alliance, the overarching organization. So with some of these organizations, they have all these branches. It's not always clear if the branches are real branches and they are run by people in that country, or if they have just made 50 Twitter accounts, WHRC Bahamas, WHRC, whatever.
They did in for the Reddit, when LGBT Alliance Reddit got banned, all of the LGBT Alliance Reddits got banned, subreddits got banned. They banned 50 accounts, and they all belonged to the same person. And when LGBT Alliance Ireland started up, they said, I can't remember what it was, but they said some word that British people call Irish people or something, some word that an Irish person would never say. Maybe someone in the chat or the comments can remember. And then someone looked it up, and they were IP address hosted was in London. So at least some of them are just AstroTurf nonsense. But whether Canada is.
I think my sense with at least LGBT Alliance US, there are people who are running that are American. I'm not aware of anything about who is running LGBT Alliance Canada, but at least some of them are real spinoffs. And I'm inclined to think that Canada is too, just based on when I was doing this research, the vibe seems a little different from whoever is tweeting on the normal account. And LGBT Alliance overarching, When I asked them if they were going to say anything, they said sharing this was a serious mistake, from which LGBT Alliance Canada issued an unreserved apology. So they're not. So they have LGBT Alliance has previously said that described Billick as one of the most incisive researchers looking into the supply side of the transgender phenomenon.
So they replied to you here, but they've since blocked you.
Yeah.
Suspicious. Surely
Yeah.
you're good because you've just called out something bad and made their movement better, right? Why would they block you?
Yeah. So they blocked me in response to me, I think, quoting their boosting her to them and asked that they were still felt that way. So after this was at the beginning of the week, and I haven't had time to continue pushing other groups. And I'll be back on that on Monday. But I think if they were going to address this and address the problem in their movement, and right now there is a serious anti-Semitism problem in the movement because many people believe this. So if it was like, I don't know, if 5% or 10% of the people in their movement believed that there was this conspiracy of people who are in fact Jewish, that would be a serious problem. I think it's way higher than that. But even that would be like something that like the movement as a whole like really needed to act on if it cared about anti-Semitism.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've seen so much of it in the wild. Just yesterday they did their I can't quite tell who started it. I hope that it was started by detrans people, but the Detrans Awareness Day, I noticed that like the main people who have been pushing it were Transgender Trend and other groups that are just using them. But on that hashtag, there was quite a few straight cis men pushing the saying, oh, look at detransitioners, that's why all trans people are bad, the classic using them as a tool thing, and then sharing Jennifer Bilek's blogs. So, it's quite on the more sort of disgusting side. All of these men who will just use women and gay people as a tool to attack trans people, they're all in on this kind of stuff often. So, well, some of them, But yeah, okay. Do we want to discuss this other tweet in this folder or move on and come back to that at the end?
Yeah, the other ones, these are our a wacky surprise.
Yeah, we've got a wild card tweet here. Ta-da!
Oh, well.
Is this the one we wanted?
No, this isn't a wacky surprise, but this is one we can talk about.
Oh, okay.
This is just a shitty thing. So this is Kathleen Stock the other day. In response, women on Twitter were generally talking about, in response to the Sarah Everard, what happened in that case? Did they find her body?
Yeah, so basically the short story is that a woman was walking home from her friend's house in London and she was on main roads and, doing all the best things that she could. She wasn't like anywhere risky or anything, and she got abducted and they found her remains. So there's been some kind of horrible situation there, and they've arrested, I think, and charged a policeman. So that's really disgusting. And yeah, it sparked like a national, at least possibly even international conversation about women's safety and how bad the problem of violence against women is, and especially when it's like from the police and it's in like the center of London, and it's just proper grim. So there was, at least in UK feminist Twitter, everyone was talking about it because it's a really big and deal and a harrowing case. So yeah, and then this was Dr. Stock's response to the situation.
So she said,
I was just going to read it out, but you can read it out, whatever.
You read it.
Okay. She says, "Dear mainstream feminists, I get how it's cathartic to list sexual assaults to Twitter, but they didn't care after Me Too and they won't care tomorrow. So instead, why not stop positively undermining the scant protections against assault women already have? You know the ones." Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
The ones here are
trans people.
being excluded from bathrooms and other women's spaces. This is disgusting. When I saw this, this is just sick. The way she is looking at this response to like real, actual sexual assaults.
Yeah, and this is an incredibly serious one. Like, someone died.
And I'm not. Is it definitely a sexual assault? But that's the people.
Actually, I think there's a related incident, something like 4 days before this. I think it's the same person. This policeman had like flashed her or exposed himself to her. So there's some kind of sex thing going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, with the specifics of the case still being unknown, what people were talking about was like, like the big fear women have walking outside, which is like being raped and murdered, right? So it was like under discussion, the sexual assault, even not knowing exactly what happens here. But coming in and not only diverting this into a weapon to try to use against trans women, but explicitly saying to women, like, stop talking about this. Just talk about trans women not being, like, just fight trans inclusion.
It's almost hard to describe the ways, how there's so many ways which this is awful. Like I covered quite a few of them on Turf Wars yesterday, because there was, I mean, so many gender critical people's first response was to try and make it about trans people, which was, of course they did, because they're not real feminists. But like, yeah, it's just so disgusting to try and twist, like, a woman was outside and they're trying to make this about trans women in the toilets. This isn't even arguably related. And trans women are also terrified of this exact same situation because it affects us too. So, like, why is this suddenly, like, we're saying, oh, all these women are unsafe and we're all worrying about it. And then a small group are saying, oh, yes, me too. And then they're saying, oh, well, we want to take your rights away as a direct response for it. Like, what are you talking about? It's just so disgusting. And then, of course, when any trans women say, what the hell, this affects me too, then they were like, oh, of course, you're making it about trans women. Me, you're so narcissistic. So, yeah, the whole response to this was just disgusting. It's horrible.
Yeah. So we were talking about anti-Semitism recently, and some people think of what happens with anti-Semitism in the 20th century as kind of involving the diversion of some kind of like anti-capitalist sentiment onto Jewish people as kind of like a pressure valve for these kind of like industrialization changes and stuff. People were upset. And then as a way, not like an intentional way, but like it got diverted. And so like nothing happened to address that. Instead, just Jewish people were targeted. I think the fear I have with this kind of spreading to the US and seeing what will happen is like the possibility of it being like a kind of pressure valve for patriarchy stuff and like targeting trans people and specifically like diverting people away from like any kind of real feminist issues onto trans women. And this is like a really unusually like explicit example of like, no, don't talk about this stuff. Don't talk about the other stuff. It's like, there's nothing you can do. It's just give up there. And instead just take it out on trans women. It's just sinister and sick.
Yeah. And there is, like you say, there's so much pressure around it at the moment because, in America, you've got the kind of looming threat of them coming for abortion, and so many states it's like practically inaccessible anyway. And there's a lot of, pressure with, I guess, like whenever you get rising fascism stuff, you get rising racism and you get rising homophobia, and you always get rising sexism and pressure for people to fit into sex roles and all this kind of bullshit. So there is going to be a lot of frustration. And if it's like, oh, here's an easy target that can't fight back, and, if you direct onto them, then all of the people who are coming for you will direct onto them too. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just kind of summarizing what you said, but yeah, I agree. It's
it's
scary stuff.
yeah, maybe I said this last week, but it's like they have found, in general, the way that they can talk about sexual assault and even blame it on men, and get conservative men to agree with them and be like, yes, what happened to you was awful. This stuff is all awful. As long as the only response they're proposing is constraining trans women's lives, they can do this and they can talk about their experiences and get support for it, from people that would not normally be supported by. And it's just like a disturbing dynamic.
Yeah, because if you say, I'm fearing sexual assault because I've been sexually assaulted, therefore we need to do something about it, and that involves changing something men have to do, the men, like, you will get pushback from that, and it makes it stressful. Like whenever I've said anything about sexual assault before, I always get some bellend come in and start telling me I'm a liar or I deserved it and all this kind of stuff. And it's horrible. But if instead of getting all of them come in and have a go at you, yeah, you can get them to just go and have a go at someone else, and you can just say all of your worries just coded in and blame it on trans. Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that.
I'm sure, but they can even blame it on men in words, as long as the solution isn't actually disruptive to the way things. I was struck by Kara Dansky, and these people was on Tucker Carlson again, which is scary. But I was really struck by how she was talking about how like all the crimes are committed by men are the danger, and Tucker was like, yes, which is it's the proposed solution that makes it friendly, and available for people like him to acknowledge this stuff. And
yeah,
it's just scary.
I saw the Women's Liberation Front, Wolf's style guide of how to write articles about trans people, and they said, one of the examples was, instead of saying only 10% of murders are committed by women in the US, say only 10% of murders are committed by women and men who identify as women in the US. So just casually adding that in, just suggesting that perhaps that 10% of murders isn't caused by women. Yeah, so it's quite explicit.
I just want to explicitly note, this thing where it's like, they didn't care after Me Too, there's no way of making progress on this, is a lie. It sucks, right?
We have made progress.
Right, it's exhausting and it's too slow and it's not linear, but people have definitely made progress. Like the feminist movement since the 70s very clearly has made progress on sexual assault. It's just like what I see with my students now, which is, I don't know, when was I an undergrad? Like 7 years ago? they're better than when we were. It's not like there's no problems anymore, but like really it is, like people's attitudes around sexual assault and stuff, at least really are like, there is improvement that's happening. And it's not going to be linear.
And some of the people,
there's nothing to do.
Yeah, some of the like big catalysts for Me Too have actually got some kind of like comeuppance. Like, I know not nearly enough. If only 3% of rapes are prosecuted and it goes to 4%, that is not the time to declare victory, but it's the time to declare progress. And like Harvey Weinstein went to jail, like some people have had career damage over it, which it's not enough, but like things have happened since Me Too. It's made people aware of it. It's a global conversation now, you know, in other countries where they've made, you know, probably made even more progress off it. So yeah, nonsense.
Yeah, and like there's backlash, right? Like, right after the Me Too stuff, like the Brett Kavanaugh stuff happened, it was awful. And it's easy to feel like nothing's getting better, because horrible stuff continues to happen. And like nothing is ever, there's never going to be like a thing or a campaign that women do and then it's fixed. Where it's like,
we've ended sexism.
Where it is fixed. But it doesn't mean there's not progress. This is just like such a reactionary move, I think, you know, which is like this problem, well, it's just impossible to fix. So instead, let's do this.
But she is right that you can, like, they probably stand much more chance of taking away trans people's rights than they do of making any big difference on women's rights.
Gonna be easier. Yeah.
And it's going to make them feel like they're making progress. So, I mean, it's easy to read strategy into what she's saying, but that might just genuinely be how she feels that, oh, well, we're not going to do anything about this, but we can take away trans people's rights. So let's focus on that instead. As a genuine, like, I feel like I'm making actual progress on this issue.
Yeah, and I think that this is, I think we have to take seriously the fact that it's a gratifying movement to be part of. They have, for the kind of like pretty, funding aside, it's like pretty grassrootsy for on the surface for people involved in it. And they've had these like really major victories, and that's like gives you a lot of political agency. And
makes people feel like they're changing their lives around them.
Okay, so I forgot
Let's move on. Do we want
the wacky thing that I now see I forgot to put screenshots in.
Oh no, is it in there now? Or?
No, so Wolf, which was formerly Kara Dansky's organization, and at least then was like retweeting a lot of Jennifer Billick stuff. Very surprisingly, retweeted 2 tweets from people that were like super critical of the Billick stuff, saying this is just like unacceptable anti-Semitism. Wolf is not an organization I would have.
No, Wolf are very extreme.
They're very extreme. I would not have targeted them in particular, given that I just would have not have thought that it was on the table. And then someone asked them about it. They said that I was like really wacky. And they said that I was maybe trying to like prevent people from looking into Martine Rothblatt, but so that some of the stuff that had happened recently had been unacceptable. I think probably it's like we're seeing the surface of some like infighting that has happened, probably, but it's interesting to watch.
It is, though. It's very frustrating. I mean, I guess, like, just suppose that trans was some top-down conspiracy theory and stuff. Them coming up with Martine Rothblatt and us saying Martine Rothblatt's a nobody will make them feel like they're onto something, but it's actually great because they're not. So the real conspiracy behind trans people, they're getting away with it. They've managed to push it onto Martine Rothblatt, who's their fall guy now. And us denying it's only going to make them think it's stronger. So whoever the real leader of trans people is, which is me, is getting away with it.
Woo!
Do we want to move on to the sex folder? We've got a sex folder. Here we go.
We kind of Jennifer Billick in the middle of our review of like, they have this like super conspiratorial rhetoric. So what is the conspiracy supposed to be a conspiracy for? What's the goal? And this I think is really like the big one. It's like somehow the motivations of people are like something sexual.
I think basically every trans person who's been on Twitter in the last 4 years has probably seen this tweet. This is a famous from Magdalene Burns, who is like a gender critical martyr almost, I guess. She died from brain cancer, I think.
Glioblastoma, I think.
Yeah.
Glioblastoma is a horrible cancer, but has, I think it's kind of like a transformative moment in the movement where a lot of people revealed their identities around this. And I don't know, for me watching it, I kind of been hoping some of these people were like going to be de-radicalized soon. And then watching the way that death really like tightened them as a community and stuff, I just thought none of these people are coming back.
Yeah, it's really grim. Lots of the stuff she said was very grim. And she also pushed lots of the Jewish people are funding it stuff.
Yeah.
Do you want to read this one out or shall I?
No, I don't. I was like, please read this.
She says, so they've been having an argument and someone says, imagine calling trans people the same thing as blackface actors, but also believing that transphobia isn't real and that TERF is a slur. There's a classic, I guess we'll say her response first. So she says about this trans person, you are fucking blackface actors. You aren't women. You are men who get sexual kicks from being treated like women. Fuck you and your dirty fucking perversions. Our oppression isn't a fetish, you pathetic, sick fuck. So she got a few swear words in there. You can feel the rage. I've just thought of another tweet I should add to our folder. But I guess for anyone who doesn't know, just a quick recap, blackface was a thing that, well, is a thing that white people sometimes do to just harass black people, like to pretend to be black people and take the piss of them. And it's in the 50s and 60s, it was like mainstream entertainment for white people to like paint their faces black and then insult black people. It was disgusting. And then a very classic gender critical argument is that trans women, by existing and looking as they do and choosing their presentation, are like an analog to that. And there's quite a lot to unpack behind that. So like the idea that wearing makeup is in some way like either taking someone's culture or parodying their appearance, when it comes to women, it like kind of requires you to say that either makeup or having long hair or something is like in some way what, you know, part of being a woman or women culture, which is kind of nonsense. Or to say that like the appearance is done with the intention of parodying people or harassing them or something, which is also just like plainly nonsense. No trans people are pretending to be women or men in order to take the piss of women and men. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Start with drag, which at least is like a performance, right? And it is possible for a man to like dress like a woman and then do a like very sexist skit, right? Every once in a while you see these like on the internet and stuff.
That's like we have Mrs. Brown's Boys in the UK. That's like the peak of British comedy. So
yeah, and I don't think it's like to like treat drag like that, but they kind of like get in the door with this argument by applying it to like at least a case of performance, and then just generalize it to all trans women. But then the sexual kicks thing is, I think if you surveyed gender critical people about whether a significant proportion of trans women were sexually motivated and were sexually aroused by, like, always by being seen as women, being in women's spaces, I think basically all of them would say yes. That
yeah, I think that's a core belief of gender critical. Definitely.
If you go to the next one,
it's just before we do, like, there's obviously a lot wrong with it, and I think that it can only really come from either hatred or just like overwhelming ignorance of what a trans person's life is. Like, I think that they might see celebrity trans people all dolled up and stuff, and then they'll see all the weird perverts online on their little hate crew groups, and that's it. That's their only exposure to trans women. And so when they imagine trans people, because they've dehumanized them so much, that is it. They don't think, oh, well, what is this person doing when they have to go shopping? What is this person doing when they have to go and pick up their child from school? What is this person doing when they go to work 9 to 5 days a week? That just doesn't even cross their mind because they've never encountered that situation. So they imagine this situation where for some reason you're doing this thing for sex, and you're like, well, okay, just imagine that it was for sex. You know, imagine I transitioned for sex reasons and then, well, I don't know, have a wank or whatever. And then like, well, I've still got 23 and a half hours in the day where I'm going to go to Asda, and I'm not going to like put makeup on to go to Asda, am I? And like, my socks don't really go with my shoes. Like, but like, it's just so, where's all the normal life? I really do think that they just do not think. They don't think trans people have normal lives, and I don't know what they expect us to do to eat and live. I just think it's plainly stupid. I don't think you can have thought about it. Anyway, sorry.
No, I think that this is a pervasive feature of their kind of thinking, and with conspiracy theories in general, where it stays at this kind of like abstract level, and there's no thought to what it would look like on the ground for this to be true. And this is Jo Bartosh, who is a gender critical writer. She says, wrote this on how fetish is dressed in the clothing of civil rights. If you could, we could maybe go through.
Yeah, do a few of these. Yeah, this is such a common. I just added another one in. Oh no, you've already got it. It's all right. That's fine.
So here, Pink says, Pink is saying something trans-inclusive, right? Yeah. They're saying the only sex-based right is to be free of discrimination. It protects everyone from discrimination based on someone's interpretation of sex. And Blue says, hashtag get your own rights, stop appropriating the rights of women and invading our spaces out of your own sick need to validate your autogynephilia. So this is like the autogynephilia is the legitimizing backing of this just wacky claim, right? So this is Ray Blanchard is a psychologist?
Sexologist.
And in the 80s, he was like, why are trans women a thing? And his theory was that there are two kinds. And every trans woman who is attracted to men has...
Exclusively men.
Every trans woman who's exclusively attracted to men has like, I don't know, kind of like sublimated this desire to appeal to men, and now thinks to do that, they need to present as a woman. So the two kinds are exclusively determined by your sexual orientation in the theory. And the other is that every trans woman who is attracted to women has this paraphilia or fetish called autogynephilia that is, so in the, in like the academic stuff, he calls it an erotic target location error, where it's like you're attracted to women for some reason you like think that what you're attracted to should be located in yourself. It's like this like pseudo cognitive explanation.
I feel like he's like the Sigmund Freud of trans people. Like he sees some kind of correlational pattern somewhere, or imagine something, and then just comes up with some reason for it. Like, oh, it must be because you love your mum. Like, you know, something like that. But instead, oh, the reason why some trans women are attracted to women must be because they have some weird sexual fetish targeted on themselves, and they fall in love with the idea of themselves being a woman. Like, where does that come from? Like, what are you talking about? What's the mechanism behind that? Why does that happen?
Why would like the way our just like cognitively, why would the way that our sexual attraction work, how would it work in a way where it like might end up being directed on ourselves? I mean, that is like would be developmentally strange. But then, and so in the most academic presentations, he'll kind of talk about is like as though it starts out like this, but then trans like becomes something more than just the fetish, right? So it's not like motivated by like sexual desires constantly, but he's like not consistent about this. I think when he talks in like on like Twitter and stuff, and it's cruel, right? This is like just this idea that that it like when I was a teenage girl, like getting dressed up in
this is the moment where Christa admits that she's got autogynephilia, by the way.
When I first heard about this, I was like, oh yeah, that's familiar. Because it is finding like getting ready and stuff like kind of sexually attractive, I think is pretty common for women, and like because sexual presentation is gender presentation is like kind of a form of sexual expression. When you're going through puberty, you're like coming into your sexual existence, and the way you think about yourself as a gendered person is changing. And it's changing in a way that's kind of like suffused with sexuality. And then it's just this like, it's just been like really vicious, like even just for trans people trying to understand themselves, that this was like a framework that was being, which is like, if you believe in science, you will accept that. And because
this thing messes up so many trans people. Like I think we could do a whole episode, perhaps we will do, just on, there's like a whole conspiracy theory and like cult around people who take Blanchard's work as like the Bible. And there are a lot of trans people who are very, very invested in this model to a crazy degree. It is like their entire lives. Shout out to anyone who's that in the chat, because I've talked to quite a few of them. Some of them are nice people. I'm not calling out, but it is totally insane, and you need to break out of it. But it's there's like I think most of the people who believe it are gender critical people and transphobic people who are looking for a reason to feel justified in not liking trans people. But it's in like with the classic apologist stuff, you come up with this idea and it doesn't really make sense. So you have to make these like, extra excuses and extra rules. And then it ends up, because you keep making all these little excuses and tweaks and stuff, it becomes this huge like law. And then it looks convincing because it all like points to each other and all this kind of stuff. And then people kind of fall into it. So often when you see a random gender critical person saying autogynephilia, to them that literally just means a man who has a fetish for being a woman. But when you talk to like a proper Blanchardian and you say autogynephilia, if you described it as, a man who has a fetish for a woman, they'll probably get offended and they'll be like, no, it's an erotic target location area and it causes gender dysphoria and it's a legitimate thing, but like there were blah, 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 and, and they're away on a 15-hour rant about it. But it's...
So the thing is that, right, I couldn't pinpoint like the bigger thing it turns out to be, but yeah, for Blanchard it is like it becomes gender dysphoria, right, which is not just like the sexual desire, it's like
but it's definitely, I think it's got two very distinct and very strong uses, and 95% of the people who say it just mean you're a pervert, and 5% of the people are like, I have this crazy worldview where I think the following and I'm going to talk to you about it for hours. So and sometimes you'll mix up the two, and when someone says you're an autogynephile and you're like, what, you think I've got some fetish for dressing as a woman? Fuck off. And then they're like, no, actually I think the following, and then you've kind of strawmanned their position, but it's actually because there's kind of two meanings to this term. But yeah, I think it's very relevant, this kind of sex drives both of them. So the other one, the other half of autogynephilia is homosexual transsexual, which actually confusingly means a straight trans woman. And the claim there is, again, there's some kind of sex motivation. It's kind of like, you're so gay that you're a woman. That which is a very insulting way to describe anyone, gay people or women. But
gay people or women.
No, gay or women, or gay men or women. That's just what you are, just super gay. But that's kind of what the claim of homosexual transsexual is. And it, like, I think surface level nonsense, because if you're someone who is like in Blanchard world, you're a gay man and you're attracted to other men, you are not going to increase the number of men that you can sleep with or anything by transitioning. That doesn't increase your pool. It doesn't increase your chance of finding a successful relationship and family or anything. So, which is quite sad for me to say, but like, just I don't think anyone would think that. And also, if you did genuinely, like, if you were a gay man and you're like, okay, I've looked at the statistics and it makes sense for me to transition into a woman, like, that would ruin your life, because you're saying, I am making all these changes to my life because I want to have sex with men. And then it's the same with autogynephile. I'm going to make all these changes to my life. Again, it's my life when I'm like having a shower, and my life when I'm brushing my teeth, and my life when I'm like cleaning the toilet. I'm going to make all these changes for what? For sex. I mean, I know some people have a lot of sex, but like, it can't be enough. It can't be enough that this wouldn't ruin your life. So it just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, sorry, I'm ranting on this one. I could talk about this thing all day.
So with the trans women themselves identifying as autogynephiles, there's this kind of like historical, like, kind of tragic thing that happened here, I think, where one of the in the early internet, one of the resources that had like a lot of information about trans healthcare and stuff was, I think, Anne Lawrence's website. That in addition to all these resources presenting that this is what's going on with trans people, is either homosexual, transsexual, or you're an autogynephile, and people really trying to interpret themselves in this lens.
So many trans women who are lesbians and bisexuals that I've talked to, so many of them have said, I didn't even realize you could be trans and not straight, which is like, it just kind of goes to show. I mean, I've said myself loads of times that I didn't realize I could be trans and like happy, basically. I didn't know I could be trans and be in a metal band. I didn't know I could be trans and have friends. I didn't know I could be trans and have a real job, which sounds mad. But when you're exposed to all these horrible stereotypes, it kind of gives you this idea that you can't. And alongside saying all trans people are failures and all trans people are like drug addicts and perverts and all this kind of stuff, another thing that's presented is you're either some perverted crossdresser who wanks off to wearing a dress or whatever, or you're like, only into men. And so lots of trans women were faced with that thing. And they're like, well, I'm not a pervert and I'm not into men, so I can't be a real trans woman. It's very common. I've heard so many people say that. Next one. Oh God, this title.
Amy Eileen Ham, who I don't remember who she is. She's must be high profile enough that I decided not to censor her. So Amy Eileen Ham, who someone said, so sad that some grown men see children as a political tool to validate their AGP fantasies. So this is, I guess,
this is a classic.
On the first one, I think it's really important to like just draw attention to how their sexual fetishes conspiracy theory, how transformative that is of like, the way you would interact with someone, right? It's like a whole different lens that would lead you to treat someone radically different and very badly if you believed it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the same with anything. Like if you just think of like any interaction you have with a person, if you think they're doing it because they've got a sexual fetish about doing it, then you don't want to be part of it. That's disgusting. Like imagine you go and like go to the checkout at Asda or Walmart or wherever you have, and the person behind the till is someone who gets off to the idea of scanning vegetables. Like, ugh. It does change your interaction. Absolutely. Well, not that I've ever encountered someone who gets off to scanning vegetables. Rule 34 though, so.
Okay, once I had this thought that was like, what if some men have a fetish for women who are cold? And now whenever I'm cold, I'm also mad because I'm like, I'm sexually gratified by this. It just changes. I hate the idea. I hate being cold and
I hadn't even thought of that. Well, I must be like the least attractive person to those people because I always make sure the heating is on like 21 and I've got like 3 layers on and
if you go to 5.5 and maybe this makes more sense before we go on to
yeah, this is one I wanted to talk about. So this one was from today, wasn't it?
No, it was Kirsty.
Oh, Kirsty.
Yeah. From February 4th.
Oh, okay. I saw this one today. So yeah, this is I'll read this one out. This first person she's replying to, this anonymous person, says, it occurs to me that people who like to beat up men because they're wearing women's clothing are unlikely to be doing so because the victim may have a female gender identity. They're going to be doing it because they're outraged by the public flouting of gender norms. So this is like a classic gender critical argument to say transphobia doesn't exist. It's actually 2 separate things. It's homophobia and breaking gender rules. That's the claim.
It's weird, right? Because it's like Kathleen Stock and other people said it's, and it's weird because it's not disputing that trans people are victimized, right? Though like Stock does also dispute that. It's just oh, we misdescribed it. If we like did the analysis of what exactly was going on here, it'd be something else. I'm like, what? That. It doesn't matter, right? If trans people are targeted because of the features that make them trans, it doesn't matter if like secretly what's happening in the heads and people are like public flouting of gender norms or whatever. It's like that's transphobia. It is like the targeting of trans people.
Also, like, it's plainly false because the whole gender critical movement, allegedly, the official position of it is we don't have an issue with men in dresses. We have an issue with men in dresses who call themselves women. So in that case, they are explicitly saying we are only interested in the people who say they have a female gender identity. Like they're just saying, without making this distinction, they wouldn't exist as a movement. And then they're saying this distinction doesn't exist. So it's nonsense.
Maya comes in way worse. And this is like this kind of parallel between the like weird overanalyzing trans people's like very serious burdens and needs into like whatever as one kind of move in the gender critical movement versus this one that Maya is going to make here. So she is the person who was fired, her contract was not renewed at an NGO because of her transphobic activism. Is it her anti-trans activism?
Her gender critical campaigning. Just because she said sex is real. That's the official policy. She was like, did you know sex is real? And they're like, that's it, you're fired.
But so she says, I think they may also be doing it because they recognize, so they hear being people who attack trans women and beat them up because they recognize or at least perceive a person involving others as non-consensual participants in a sexual act, and this is what they're outraged at. Obviously, no one should be beating anyone up, but e.g. in relation to single-sex spaces. Non-consensual sexual acts or sexual assault. It is, in fact, okay to physically defend yourself against sexual assault. And this is just like a justification for attacking trans women under the guise of like, oh, of course you shouldn't beat anyone up. It's normally like basically everyone right thinks that you can physically defend yourself from sexual assault. And
yeah, this is so vile. Like it really made me feel ill seeing like mainstream, hugely influential gender critical people saying they recognize a person here involving others in and non-consensual participants in a sexual act. That's that they're talking about trans women wearing their own clothes. So like they're talking about me right now. Like, I mean, this is what a women's tank top or something from Amazon, and now I'm involving you all in my sexual fetish. That's just so bullshit. Like, what clothes am I supposed to wear? How am I supposed to go to the shops? Like, what do you want me to do? Every single thing you could just say was women's clothing because, I mean, do I have to go and buy things that explicitly say for men? Is that the gender critical position? That I have to buy things that say for men on them? Because otherwise it's part of some ridiculous fetish. And what am I even doing? I'm just living a normal life. I'm exactly the same as her. In her profile picture, she's wearing like a classic woman's cut top that is more commonly seen on women. And what? So if you wear that, it's not some sexual fetish, and when I do, it is because, like, it's just so disgusting. It just pathologizes existing. It just means there's absolutely nothing you can do as a trans woman, not only without you somehow involving everyone in a sex thing, but then you like provoking people and being deserving of, or not technically, you shouldn't really beat them up, but at least deserving of the idea of, people are going to beat them up. And just because she says, oh, you shouldn't fight people, that doesn't mean that everyone else who thinks this idea, when people read this, they're not going to onboard both the idea that trans women are all sex perverts and they shouldn't technically beat them up. They're just going to be like, well, trans women are all perverts. I don't like perverts. I'm not having a pervert anywhere near my sister or my daughter or whatever. And then they'll see you just minding your own business and declare you as a pervert and then come and fight you. And it happens. This isn't theoretical. This fucking happens all the time. It's one of the main excuses to attack trans people is that they are somehow being a pervert. Like that's the whole justification. That's the whole drive behind at least 50% of transphobia. So it's just disgusting.
Yeah,
sorry, rant mode.
No, the rant is justified. I mean, I think it's like totally pathologizing, but also, despite the last sentence, it is like the description of what is happening at every moment of trans people's public existence is a one that would justify violent self-defense, right? Like, unless you're an extreme pacifist, this is a justification for self-defense. For even just being in the presence of a trans person, probably just a trans woman existing, right? And like, it is serious when they are engaging in this kind of rhetoric. That is the kind of rhetoric that justifies violence. It is very serious. I mean, what we see, it's not normally like the figureheads who then do something violent. It's the inspire people, and they are using rhetoric that is violence-inspiring rhetoric, and
yeah, and getting mainstream platforming for it. Like, we're gonna have to go and debate this on BBC News and stuff like, oh, you know, should we sterilise trans people before they have rights? Should children be allowed healthcare? Are all trans women perverts? We've got to have a public debate over this thing, which is just like plainly false and plainly oppressive, just vile. The fact that like this kind of thing should just be an instant, like, this is plainly transphobic, fuck off. Your opinion is worthless. Like, if you genuinely are going around thinking that trans people just like wearing their own clothes is some kind of fetish, then your brain has rotted so far that your opinion is literally worthless. You're too irrational to have a view on trans people, and you should go and get help because you have a serious issue with your ability to view the world. Like, it's ridiculous. So fuck off.
Yeah, and whenever people point out to them that this is rhetoric of justifying violence, the response is always like, oh, you think like the men who beat up trans women are listening to feminists? So like you think it's like feminists that are inspiring this? And first of all, you're not feminists. Second of all, yes, cultural narratives around people's, like, what people are impactful, and they are dominant creators, disgustingly and tragically, of trans people right now, like of the narrative of their lives. It's horrible, and it is obviously culturally influential in the UK right now.
They're in the news every single week. Every single week for the last 3 years has had some gender critical person in the news pushing one of their ideas. Of course, the violent men are listening to their ideas. I mean, of course, and to say, you know, like, oh, you think you're trying to blame it on women, like, no, trying to blame it on the gender critical ideas, which has loads of support from men. In fact, most people opposed to trans rights are men, and most people who are opposed to gender critical are women. So this isn't about blaming men's violence on women. This is about blaming violence, transphobic violence, which usually does come from cis men, on ideas which justify that violence by calling trans people perverts. So don't just try and worm out of it with stealing some feminist sounding language and escaping from the fact that you are a hugely influential person. Getting all my sounds mixed up. You're a hugely influential person pushing this narrative which puts trans people in danger. Like, of course it's partly your fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true that men are not inspired to violence against women by feminists. It's because if you are the kind of person who is inspiring violence against women, you're not a feminist. This is just sick.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, grim.
And I do want to blame, if you say stuff like this, like, it is not equivalent to yourself beating someone up. But you are using rhetoric that obviously is justificatory rhetoric. And when you are making like moralized accusations against people that are extreme is a rhetorical move that centrally justifies responses to it that are proportionate.
It's this
right?
Stochastic terrorism stuff.
Yeah.
It's similar to that, where like people like Lauren Southern and Ben Shapiro and stuff talk about how Muslim immigrants are a danger to Western society, and then some psycho goes and shoots up a mosque or something. Like, and then they say, well, I didn't do it. There's nothing to do with me. I didn't encourage. I condemn violence. It was like, yes, but you're also selling a demonstrably false and irrational, bigoted worldview, which is inspiring this kind of action, because of course it is.
And it is just ahistorical to act like this kind of rhetoric, which is, I wish I knew who. So there's a paper in genocide studies that is about, so the norm is like, what prompts genocide is dehumanizing people. But it was like, it's not just, so dehumanizing is like, when people are dehumanized, stuff becomes permissible. Like violence against them becomes like in the range of possibilities, but it's not like itself doesn't bring it about. And the key thing that like really is like toxification, where it's not just like not human, so normal moral prohibitions don't apply, but they're like a threat. Just their continued existence is an active threat to everyone around them, and like, that is really dangerous. And that is the kind of rhetoric they're engaging in here. And
dehumanization is what allows them to just have trans healthcare in the state it is. They just don't care. They're not, trans people aren't really human. Their needs aren't important, so we just don't care about the healthcare. But yeah, in order to, like, the next step up is when you start saying not only should you just not give a shit about trans people, but you also need to actively defend yourself against them by taking proactive steps.
Defend yourself or defend women and children.
Yeah, defending women and children is a classic motivation for bigotry, is using that as an excuse.
I think Joshua said this last time, I think on air, but yeah, just like if we're looking at stuff that can provoke violence, stuff that portrays people as threats or immediately harming women and children is dangerous. And the gender critical movement has been escalating, right? I think on this rhetoric, it's kind of always been there, and they've kind of always had the at least metaphorical, like transgressing women's boundaries, violating consent, when it's like in part some of that is metaphorical, right? But then this is not metaphorical anymore. Just the claim that they recognize or at least perceive, which what does that mean? Recognize or at least perceive? Is at least perceive supposed to be like, oh, maybe they're wrong?
I think it's a bit of a worm out, or an attempt to say like, oh, they're recognizing that all trans people are perverts. Or that's what they think anyway. That's kind of how it read to me.
I don't think it's perceived like that, but yeah, I do think that's what she's trying to. I think
stop doing a philosophy. They infer.
It's real too. But yeah, this stuff is great.
Yeah. Do we want to look at any of them? We've done 1 hour.
Maybe we can do the next stuff. We'll talk about maybe next time, but then we might have someone on. Is the where they then is the question, if you believe that adult trans women are sexually motivated, is like, so what's going on with trans adolescents? And it has the kind of cynical conclusions you would imagine.
Yeah, so I've had this said to me so many times. So one of the things they all love to do this distinction between AGP and HSTS, autogynephile or homosexual transsexual, the Blanchard split we were talking about earlier, although it is kind of just what is your sexuality, it's also one of the good ones categorization system. They'll say AGPs are a threat to women and HSTS isn't. So then they can say, oh, I support the good ones, just not the bad ones. But then they want to categorize everyone they don't like as AGP. So that means that they then come up with all these other things like, oh yeah, some AGPs have sex with men in order to validate their fetish. So suddenly sexuality isn't a factor in it. And then they'll say, oh, well, it's how late you transition. But then someone they won't like will transition early. So they're like, oh, they'll lie about the age they transition. Lying is actually a key feature of autogynephiles. So if you see a trans woman and they're lying, then that makes them an autogynephile. And like how well they put. And there are so many different things. But it also means that often they don't even need a thing. They'll just call you it. And I've had it before. And they'll be like, oh, autogynephile, you're an autogynephile because they don't like me because I'm arguing back, and I'll be like, I knew that I wanted to be a girl when I was like 6 years old, you know, that was things that I was thinking and feeling when I was 6. Are you saying that I had some fetish for being a woman when I was 6? And they'll just be like, yes. And I've had people accuse me of masturbating at the age of 8 over the idea of being. I'm like, I mean, I don't even know if that's physically possible, but that's certainly not the case. Or saying that I had some weird fetish for, like, and I was probably a danger to girls in my class at school, and like all this kind of stuff that's just like insane, and it's just putting it on these children. And you see it so much when they're talking about trans kids. Whenever they talk about trans kids, they only talk about trans men, trans boys, and they'll talk about females. And then when they're talking about, you know, you say, well, you know, this young girl should be able to use the girls' facilities at her school because she is a young girl. And they'll just be like, no, she's probably got some pervert, like she's a fetishist. You know, teenage boys can be perverts too. Like, she's not a teenage boy. She's like a 9-year-old girl. Like, what are you talking about? It's vile, putting these horrific motivations onto children because it's necessary to make this ideology work. Yeah, just makes no sense. But yeah, I think my favourite little get out for this is orthogonophiles lie, because then it suddenly makes the entire theory infalsifiable, because you say, oh, you know, like, are you attracted to women? Did you transition late in your life? Do you have a thing about women's clothes? Did you used to cross-dress? And you're just like, no, none of that. And they're like, well, but you're lying. And that means you're an orthogonophile. It's like, don't ask me any questions then. Just tell me what you think.
I think that even just the academic theory is like a kind of like spontaneous, it posits like a spontaneous conspiracy where like trans women are just systematically lying about this and covering it up.
All of us.
And yeah. Actually, could we do 6 and 7 real fast?
Yeah, let's do it. And then, so if we do 6 and 7 really fast, then we might be able to get in a couple of questions. So if anyone wants to ask questions, tag me in the chat. We're going to have to end at past because I've got another show afterwards. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. But anyway, just so we know, we won't get to all of your questions, but if you get a good one in, we will answer it. But let's do 6 and 7. Some more stock footage.
Yeah, so again, my benchmark for the views of the people who are most interested in presenting the good face, the reasonable, serious concerns face, the academic face. And Harry Wimbush, this guy, has retweeted this tweet of trans women. It's just screenshots of trans women talking about it being important for young trans people to have access to trans healthcare. And he says, why are male trans activists who transitioned in middle age encouraging tween and teen girls to transition? And Kelly Sugg says, this disquieting aspect of trans activism, number 475, way that late transitioning trans women, at least some of whom transition for autogynephilic reasons, maintain highly constrained narrative, leading gender dysphoric young girls towards hormones and self-mutilation. Apples and oranges.
What does apples and oranges mean?
Apples and oranges, like you're comparing two things that are different.
Oh, right, okay.
And then in the next screenshot,
can I, just before we move on, so Mr. Henry Wimbush has actually got out. So he sent loads of disgusting, harassing tweets to trans women, including to Sean Fay. That's one I remember of him, just saying, you're a man, you're a pervert, all this kind of stuff. And he was, and still is, an Oxford sociology professor. And he got outed as just like a professor at a university writing all this disgusting stuff for ages and ages and ages, and there's just nothing happened. Because he was just harassing women and trans people, particularly trans women, but all kinds of people on the internet for ages, writing disgusting things, and just hasn't had no repercussions at all. So anyway, yeah. Sorry, on to your next one.
Michael Biggs Isn't it?
Before we commit to that accusation,
Yeah.
it says, so according to Oxford student, it says Professor of Sociology and Fellow of St. Cross College, Michael Biggs has been posting transphobic statements online under the Twitter handle Mr. Henry Wimbush. The Oxford student can reveal. So, yes.
Yeah, so he is now publishing academic research about the trans conspiracy that is being cited as like legitimate. The way he entered this movement was by just harassing people.
It's just disgusting, the stuff they can get away with.
And so here, Zach has picked up this screenshot of this woman who is funny how terrorists and concerned transphobes like to paint the picture that children have a finite window for puberty and how blockers for a couple of years mean they may not
go through puberty, probably.
And she says, like, I said last night to my breasts that I just grew at 40. So it's a joke, right? It's a joke that's like based on this like clearly not being true. And Stock says, oh, but
sorry.
She says, one of the most terrifying things about contemporary trans activism is this: poorly understood, life-changing medical interventions on mostly female children are being shielded from public scrutiny in order to serve the political interests of autogynephilic adult males. To spell it out, a child who wishes to breastbind or remove breasts or halt puberty because she hates her sex body or because she's gay and it's easier to believe she's a boy is a totally different phenomenon than a male who gets aroused at the thought of having breasts. The AGB tail is wagging the puberty blocking dog here. What she is accusing this woman of is like, it's just inhuman, right? In order to cover up her fetish, she is encouraging young girls to mutilate themselves. Is such an extreme accusation, and being thrown out just totally reckless. Like,
it's not just reckless, it's also completely ridiculous because trans people have absolutely no control over their own healthcare, and that's a huge problem. It's the experts and doctors and scientists who are almost all cis people who are in control of it, and they're reluctantly helping trans children based on decades of evidence. Not like this isn't some adult trans woman being like, oh, do you know what will validate my fetish if I can get young girls to transition for some reason? It doesn't really make any sense at all. It's literally decades of evidence that has led to this situation. It's.
I think the theory is that like the AGP tail wants access to women's spaces to gratify their fetish. And in order to get that, they have to create a cultural narrative where it's not a fetish. And the way they're going to do that is by through this narrative of trans kids, and in particular, all these young trans men. It's like the way to legitimize the fetish and then get more access to the places that gratify it. Which is obviously a conspiracy theory, and is just vicious. It's
vile. Also, if you talk to young trans men in the trans community, they may well complain about feeling like older trans women don't give a fuck about them and spend all the time talking about trans women and old people rather than, that there's definitely a discourse every now and then that happens in the trans community of like, we only ever talk about trans women because that's all the bigots talk about, and so that's all we end up having to talk about. But it just doesn't. There's nothing of this matches with reality, even past the surface level analysis. I don't think.
Yeah, just the idea that it's suspicious that trans adults
want to help trans kids.
Care for adolescents, and just sick.
I know, and and this it's very. Sorry.
Just such demonization. Like, you just have to have like. You have to think of like mental perception of what trans people are like has to be just so dark for this to seem at all plausible.
And I do feel like often every single one of my opinions can be explained. They'll have an explanation for all of them, and they can all be explained in one way of like, well, of course I want to live my life like a normal person. Of course I want to go to the toilet with all the other women. Of course I want to like have my own family one day. Of course I want to help trans children. Like all of my reasoning behind my political positions is I want to have a normal life, and I want other people like me to have a normal life. And then they have all these wacky like, oh, it's actually a sexual fetish that's like invented by Jewish people that like you're trying to trick young girls into cutting off breasts to fund a medical big pharma. Like, what are you talking about? Why are there all of your theories have a much simpler explanation, which is trans people just want the same rights as everyone else.
Yeah, then they do this about women's spaces a lot, right? Like this shows that they just really care about like getting into women's bathrooms. Like, why are they so obsessed with having access to the bathrooms? To live a normal life, to exist in public, and like not have to go home to go to the bathroom, just to live a life and be able to go like anywhere in public like other people can.
It's also a classic feminist issue, that one, like urinary leash, isn't it? It's a concept that...
So the urinary leash concept is like, before there was widely available public bathrooms and men, I guess, were just, I don't know, peeing on the side of the streets, women weren't able to leave the house for longer than the amount of time that you would have before you had to go to the bathroom. And they talk about this. They talk about the urinary leash is like the fact that it constrains your life if you don't have a place to go to the bathroom in the public. And they exclusively talk about this as a reason not to let trans women into the bathroom, because then for some reason cis women might not be able to use it and might have to go home. Talk about it as though this need to use the bathroom only exists for cis women, rather than it very obviously applying to everyone, right?
Yeah, and it's so backwards because like cis women aren't going home because they're fearing trans women, because they've been using the bathroom with trans women for their entire lives, at least in the UK and the US. And then on like, it's just such a reversal. They're saying this is going to make things worse for women if we allow what's already been happening to carry on happening, and it's not going to make things worse for trans women, even though we want to explicitly ban you and explicitly create the problem for you that we're complaining about. So, complete nonsense.
I think there's a reason why they like to always talk, like kind of fold the bathroom stuff into like bathrooms and changing rooms and hostels and sleeping cars. And part of it, I think, is just because like people think the bathroom thing is stupid in the US, especially because we kind of went through this discourse already. But I think also it like kind of conceals like the really extreme consequences that this would have on people's lives. Where like excluding trans women from any of these places is discriminatory and not acceptable and otherizing. But excluding trans women from women's bathrooms is just like a direct assault on their ability to exist in public and to do basically anything in public. It's just like the head above, like, it's just so serious in terms of like the kind of impact that, the kind of bathroom laws that were proposed in North Carolina, where it was just like a crime for trans people to use the bathroom. And so they couldn't go anywhere in public unless...
Or at work. You couldn't do anything.
You had to like, it wasn't, I don't know if it ever like actually was active, but you would have to, right, like check before you went anywhere if they had a unisex toilet, or you would have to go in and out yourself and be like, just stick out. And it just like, it reminds me of the kind of like pre-ADA like struggle of disabled people, where they like, there's all these burdens of like not being able to exist in public and be able to count on like facilities you can use, and the way that like shuts people out of public life and their ability to like be part of society and have just like full and complete lives.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very frustrating. So let's get one question in.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, it's fine. Sorry?
I'm sorry to people who ask questions.
No,
and then
it's okay. So I think this is a good question. So this is from Lucy Marie 100. On a serious note, what is the most serious thing that you will see happening in the next 12 months with the anti-trans movement and attacks on trans women? So this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. It's quite scary. There is on a larger scale, this is the year that I think it's coming to America, and it's going to get big in America. So that's scary globally. There's going to be a lot of attacks on particularly trans kids in America, and like the discourse is coming, and it's going to be in all the, it's going to be on Tucker Carlson every single night kind of thing, which is going to be grim. And then in the UK, we've got lots of big court cases this year. We've got the Mayor Forstater appeal, which we were talking about earlier. We've got the trans kids healthcare appeal that we have talked about before. We just had some nonsense court case last week about the census. But there's quite a few other big ones. I can't even remember all of them. They've got so many of them going. They've spent literally millions of pounds on court cases trying to take away trans rights. One good thing on the horizon is possibly a ban on conversion therapy in the UK, which that will be a big blow to gender critical. If they're like they won't be able to do anything. There's no treatment for trans kids that they accept that isn't conversion therapy. So that will put a lot of pressure, I think, on having to treat trans kids using the science rather than their bullshit, because otherwise you're just leaving these kids with nothing. It's going to look really bad for them if all of what they're pushing is illegal. So that's a really good thing and something we should really focus on. And it's not a court thing; it's a government decision. But I don't know. It's very easy to scaremonger, and I know that I have a voice that people listen to, and I am also a negative, pessimistic person who fears for the future on this stuff, and fear drives me a lot. But, I'm getting a gender recognition certificate. I think I've switched from saying don't get one because it doesn't really benefit your lives to we don't know what they're going to come for, and maybe you'll need the protections. I don't know. I don't want to scare people, but this year could be kind of grim. So, sorry. Christa, do you have a view?
Yeah, so I have one positive thing to say, which is I think once earlier I said that they basically always win. And in hearing this, I was reminded pleasantly that Maya Forstater lost. And it was a significant loss, right? The tribunal or whatever, the judge, I guess, said that the view that she was expressing wasn't deserving of respect in a normal society or something.
Yeah, it was. This is a good one. So hang on, let me get the actual quote up.
I do want to flag that it is not the case that everything has been.
In fact, in terms of money, in terms of the money they've spent, excluding last week, which I haven't added to the graphs and charts that I have yet. The most of the cases that have resolved in terms of money haven't gone in their favour. There's about 50% outstanding, which haven't resolved yet, and of the ones that have resolved, 50% failed, 25% succeeded, and 25% were partial success. And that was just one really big case which had an appeal last week, which was big in terms of money but kind of pointless, and it was about some knobhead fighting against the police. But yeah, the actual quote is, actually, I might just put this on the screen. Hang on, give me 1 second, because it's quite a good little, what do we want it? Sorry, I'm being a bit slow. Right, here we go. I just really like this picture because it's quite funny. So someone made this little meme and it says, "This approach is not worthy of respect in a democratic society. Forstater versus CGD Europe 2019. And there's a nice little rainbow. So this? I found out more about this. I didn't really quite know how the law works in the UK, but this isn't the judge's own words. This is a judge quoting another judge who came to the same conclusion in a different case about a similar thing. So there's precedent already set. So an appeal will be more difficult, because this isn't a new decision. It's just pointing to an old one. But...
with the original question, less optimistically, because in the US, I'm mostly concerned about the right. And there's this question that's like, is it going to be like it was in the UK, and really go with this, we're on the left guys, and kind of recruiting people, I think, who aren't already pretty far on the right, or just actually on the far right. And I kind of think that won't happen in the US. I mean, the main activists in the US are not that good at the guys in the way that people in the UK were pretty early on. And they don't have the kind of like professional academic guys that they can maintain for a long time. They're saying things that are much more extreme regularly. They're like on Tucker and stuff. But I'm nervous about the what's going to happen with the right. I'm nervous about the idea of the right and the kind of like QAnon people who are kind of like without a cause right now, latching on to like Billick style conspiracy theories would be awful.
Yeah, QAnon has a lot of power in terms of crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
because Marjorie Taylor Greene is in on it. Like she's on it. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, like unless we're talking about like abortion clinic bombings and stuff, which aren't really happening anymore in the way that they were in the 80s. But I mean, there is this like chaotic energy on the right now, and yeah.
One thing that I'm hoping, which might sound a bit selfish from a British person, but I feel like while Trump was in power and the right was feeling really emboldened and feeling like they were winning, the idea of them sending a load of money over to the UK to fight trans rights sounded quite appealing. But now they've got Joe Biden in power and they're fighting for their right to be a bigot, whatever I don't even know what they think they're fighting for. Freedom. Now they're fighting for that. Then they don't have as much money to send out to all this garbage in the UK. So everything that's happening this year has already been funded. And for sure, we do, lots of the funding does come from people here. But, the UK economy is going to crash and the US is going to stop funding. So that might be a positive. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think like the feature that kind of allowed the movement to be rewarding for people in the UK, where there has been successes and people have gotten things out of it, is the kind of thing that I think like the QAnon people are kind of starving for right now. Is like a movement that has wins and is getting like a conspiracy where they're going to be like beating the conspiring force.
Yeah.
And so that's scary as a feature of. So, I mean, maybe they wouldn't have the same kind of success.
And they do have their high-profile trans person. I can't remember her name now. The lady who's Joe Biden's put in, like they fucking hate her.
Yeah,
so.
I was looking at QAnon forums like right after she was named for unrelated reasons, and I was just like the amount that they had focused on her scared me.
Yeah, Anyway, I guess on a positive note, thanks for watching.
Always your respect in a democratic society.
Yay! So thank you very much, everyone, for coming on this episode. Sorry the questions couldn't be as long this week.
Yeah, sorry.
It's my fault. So I'm not going to hijack the show loads, but I've got another show which is going to start in like half an hour, which is called the Transatlantic Call-In Show, and basically you can call in and talk about trans issues with me and another trans woman who is also Mega. So hopefully see you in half an hour. But also thank you very much for coming to the XX Factor, because I feel like, like Turf Wars is total nonsense. The Call-In Show is going to be like lots of Agni Aunt stuff as well as arguing with knobheads, but like this is, I just feel like really important discussing what's actually going on. I feel like this is the most important of the shows. So Yeah, thank you very much for coming. And yeah, thanks for doing the research again, Christa.
This is still the first episode's research.
We did have the Billick detour, but this is still from the first folder. You very optimistically were like, here's 400 screenshots for the first episode.
Yeah.
We didn't even get into the subfolder this time.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for coming. Love you. Bye.